Welcome to the Black Post, where the message will be sent. So, things are not looking well for Nimrata Nikki Rahanda Haley. Excuse me if I butcher her name. I really don't know how to pronounce it. I'm not that well in pronouncing regular English words, so it really doesn't matter. So here we are on the Black Post, and the message today will be sent about Nimrata Nikki Rahanda Rawala Haley. Again, excuse me, but we have to get down to the nitty gritty of things because first and foremost, family, she does not use her official name. She does not use her official first name, which is her Indian given name by her Indian parents that were born in India. We understand that she was born in Bamberg, South Carolina, and her spouse is Michael Haley, who is a white man. But also, Nikki Haley also designates herself, label herself as a white woman. But we're going to get into it all here today on the Black Post. Here we go. Listen to this.
Tonight, Nikki Haley doubling down on this controversial remark about the history of race in America.
We're not a racist country, Brian. We've never been a racist country.
On the campaign trail today, Haley addressing the criticism head on, turning to a regular part of her stump speech for cover.
You said the other day that we have never been a racist country. Was that a slip of the tongue?
No. Listen, I was born a brown girl in a small rural town in South Carolina. If my parents never wanted us to think we lived in a racist country, did we face racism? Yes.
It's the latest in a...
Right there. This is a problem where Nikki Haley doubled down on her contradiction that already tells most voters who are Republican. Okay, people who may have thought, well, I'm a Democrat, but I'm definitely not going to vote for Joe Biden because he has not provided any tangibles for foundational Black Americans, aka U.S. freedmen. So I don't really want Trump back in office, but I'm looking to another candidate. Okay, Tim Scott dropped out, Variki Swamy dropped out. Again, one of the same when you're talking about Nikki Haley and Variki Swamy, both Indian descent. And so I'm thinking Nikki Haley is the best choice. But wait a minute, Nikki Haley is not actually Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley, even though she labeled herself as a white woman, is of Indian descent as well and goes as Asian. But publicly, she goes as a white woman. And on top of all of that, she is denying racism in America. She is denying that America was built on racism, that America is inherently racist from the way that America was even built by the transatlantic slave trade. See, this is where she gets herself in trouble, and I see that Donald Trump does not dive into certain conversations. He may just ignore it, but I think this was a setup from the get-go, and that is what we need to understand here today. Nikki Haley is not a viable candidate to be the president of the United States by simply denying that America was built on racism. And her too was built on race. Listen, let me show you some other things here before I dive truly into it. I'm gonna let the remarks here go ahead.
Series of campaign stumbles on race from Haley as she rises in the polls. Last month, the former South Carolina governor faced fierce backlash for failing to mention slavery when asked about the cause of the Civil War.
What do you want me to say about slavery?
No, you've answered my question. Thank you.
Next question.
That firestorm and the flurry of clarifications that followed, the possible driver of a temporary, if critical, adjustment on the trail, limited Q&As with voters, and near zero questions from her traveling press corps. Choices that drew rebukes from Haley's GOP rival, Ron DeSantis.
Ladies and gentlemen, this will be the last question.
No, I'm going to do some more. Don't worry. How many is that? Like 4 or 5? I got to do more than that. That'll equal the number that Haley and Trump do in a month.
But today, Haley reversing course, answering questions from voters for the first time since Monday's Iowa caucus, and facing her first reporter gaggle in weeks.
You've seen him at his campaign rallies. He's ramping up his attacks.
Days from the New Hampshire primary.
Let me just point this out, that her gender has nothing to do with her not being fit to be the president of these United States of America. See, Nikki Haley, the former U.S. ambassador to the UN, she made these comments very recently, claiming that America has never been a racist country, but Is this claim rooted in historical fact? Absolutely not. So we have to examine the undeniable evidence that contradicts Haley's assertions, because America's foundation rests upon the brutal transatlantic slave trade, where millions of Africans were forcefully brought to this land as slaves, that we're foundational Black American descended from, the first true Americans. This dark chapter in history undeniably proves the existence of deep-rooted racism, the systematic genocide and displacement of the Red Mongolian Native American tribes, such as the Trail of Tears, where they was basically killing Native Americans simply because of their race, simply because of the color of their skin, which demonstrates a clear history of racism towards people that are non-white. What about the notorious era of Jim Crow? Legislation, this is by the state. So this was governed, racism was governed by the U.S. So how has U.S. never been a racist country? Because Jim Crow. Legislation further indicates systematic racism, with people being subjected to cruel segregation, voter suppression, as well as racial violence. The inspired civil rights movement of the 1960s was a direct response to the systematic racism of Black Americans and what they face. Like our true leaders like Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, just to name a couple, Huey Newton, the Black Panther Party, the Black Liberation Army, all of these groups fighting against systematic oppression and systematic racism. But Nikki Haley would like to deny all of those things. She would like to not only double down, she would like to triple down. And this is where we have to call her out for all the racist and non-racist remarks that she made. Listen to this.
What was the cause of the United States Civil War?
Well, don't come with an easy question or anything. I mean, I think the cause of the Civil War was basically how government was going to run, the freedoms and what people could and couldn't do. What do you think the cause of the Civil War was? I'm sorry? I think it always comes down to the role of government and what the rights of people are. And I will always stand by the fact that I think government was intended to secure the rights and freedoms of the people. It was never meant to be all things to all people. Government doesn't need to tell you how to live.
So that's something that we have to point out almost automatically here, because she's already denying the cause of the Civil War. We all know the cause of the Civil War and what was truly about. It was about keeping slavery. It's about keeping people in bondage and working until their last days on earth, working until they died. That is what this is about. Solomon D. Wise states that denying racism is how you stay in with the dominant society. Thank you, Solomon. And see, these are the things, family, that we must call out, and we have to look at these presidential candidates who are going on to be on the public stage internationally and deny the very fabric, deny the very construction of America. Let me back this up just a little bit for context. Okay, so the question was, what was the cause of the Civil War? And she states here the role of government and what the right of the peoples are.
And I will always stand by the fact that I think government was intended to secure the rights and freedoms of the people. It was never meant to be all things to all people.
Can somebody tell me what the hell she's talking about? Can someone tell me what the hell Nikki Haley is talking about? Because I'm very confused. If you're running for president, okay, if you're running for president, how don't you know the reason and why this country was first built on the backs of slaves, on the backs of. I just don't get it. But she is still running, even though she lost the Iowa caucus. She has lost the New Hampshire caucus. Ron DeSantis, he already knew. He said, I'm pretty high in the polls, but Nikki Haley may be doing 1 or 2 points better than me, but I'm not going to beat Donald Trump. So let me just go ahead, because the only reason why Ron DeSantis stayed inside the race, can I tell you guys why? The only reason why Ron DeSantis stayed inside the race is because he thought Trump was going to get persecuted, prosecuted, and not be able to run. And when he realized after the Iowa caucus that nothing was truly going to happen to Donald Trump, he stayed inside of the race. Let her finish her lies and her denials, okay? Let her finish her lies and denials.
Government doesn't need to tell you how to live your life. They don't need to tell you what you can and can't do. They don't need to be a part of your life. They need to make sure that you have freedom. We need to have capitalism. We need to have economic freedom. We need to make sure that we do all things so that individuals have the liberties.
Okay, I really thought that I was going to be able to let her finish, but she's going on and on and on. And this is straight deflection because, again, she's talking to her voter base, which are Republicans. She's trying to really pull some of that MAGA crowd away from Donald Trump. Let me tell you, Nikki, that won't happen. These people signed up for Trump for eternity. They want him to be the dictator of America. So you have no chance. You have no chance. Wise says if she had answered the question correctly, she will already be out of the race. That may be true. They all did it. Marika Ramaswamy did it. And Ron, the KKK DeSantis also did it. Okay, a bunch of word salad. I do agree.
So that they can have freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to do or be anything they want to be without government getting in the way. What do you want me to say about slavery?
Okay, with the gentleman in the distance, I know you guys couldn't hear it, but he stated, I can't believe in 2023 that you didn't mention slavery. And then she said, what do you want me to say about slavery? Say that I was the cause of the Civil War. Yeah, all the things you talk about, economics, yeah, it was because of the Civil War. It's because the North wanted some of the wealth and power of the South, but the South wasn't willing to give that. Don't forget that the Northeast started kind of the industrial age, right? They started the industrial age. So the way that they were doing slaves in the South, they necessarily couldn't do them in the North. That's why everybody was fleeing to the North, because they became free, essentially. That's why people were fleeing to the North. This is when America was truly divided, and that is the cause of the Civil War, Nikki Haley, or should I call you Namrata? So next question. That's your girl, Nikki Haley. But there are some things we need to talk about, Nikki Haley. There are some things that we really need to comb through with Nikki Haley, because there are some things that need to be revealed here. This is the Black Post, where the message will be sent. We are exposing a lot of these political pundits, a lot of these political imposters. Okay, and the only reason why she's qualified to run for president, by the way, is because she's first generation of Indian descent in America. Okay, her parents are immigrants from India. So let me tell you why her comments were contradictory to what she already has said publicly and that was recorded. Let's go through this. Here we go. Now, this is from I think an interview or sit down with a reporter of sorts, and it states here in the announcement video, she opens with an aerial shot of Bamberg, South Carolina. That's where she was born, her birthplace. Speaking about a time when railroad tracks divided the town by race, and she seemingly didn't fit with either side. Okay, if America is not racist, how don't you fit with either side? It should be sort of this kumbaya, all lives matter, little black girls and little white boys can hold hands together and go to school together, like no segregation, right? Because America's not a racist country. She repurposed her well-trod line. I was the proud daughter of Indian immigrants, not black, not white. I was different. Okay. South Carolina first governor of color. And during her tenure, following the gruesome 2015 killing of 9 worshipers at Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church, a historical black church, at the hands of a white supremacist, it was Haley that led the state effort in removing the Confederate battle flag from the State House grounds, a point she referenced in her announcement video. America is one of the few countries that glorify the losers of a battle and denounce the winners of that same war that unify the country. Now, here's the question. I know there's been many books that was written about this. What would America be today if the South, if the Confederates won the war? You guys ever thought about that? Where would America be at today if the Confederates won the war? I just don't know. To me, it's a very complicated, complex prediction of where America would be at today. But again, we're calling out Nikki Haley today because she's not ready to be president. As a matter of fact, when it comes to Foundation Black Americans, if any of these political presidential candidates are not going to provide tangibles, then none of them are suitable to be presidents because you have repatriated other groups except for Black Americans. Let me move on. There are other parts of her biography and political record that are a bit more difficult to reconcile. Because in 2001, for example, she reportedly listed her race as white. Now, why would Nikki Haley do that? She listed her race as white on her voter registration card 3 years before she entered into elective politics. Nikki, no. Or should I say Namrata, no. Were you colonized? You were born in America. We understand that your parents come from a colonized country where the British colonized India for 90 years. 89 to 90 years. So her family, I would like to believe, came over here with the colonized minds of colorism. And I'll get on that as well because on my main channel, Black Logic, I even interviewed an Indian woman by the name of Charetta Agrawal, who wrote a book called The Black Rose. And she was talking about colorism in India and her battle with skin bleaching, how she was addicted to skin bleaching. But we understand that Nikki Haley is already fair-skinned, right? She would like to label herself as brown. She looks like a white woman with a tan. Let's be real. She looks like a white woman with a tan, does she not? But she labeled herself as a white woman. Okay. Now, when you see Nikki Haley, do you see Indian? I think I see Indian because I know she's Indian. And I know how some fair-skinned Indian women look. But if you never told me that Nikki Haley was Indian, I would have thought that she was a white woman. I thought she may have been Italian or something like that. Okay? Of course, anything for politics. I don't know why that guy even ran. Okay? I don't know why he even ran. I have no idea why he even ran, family. But there's some things that I think Nikki Haley should be evidently aware of. What about the KKK, Nikki Haley? What about the KKK? Now, we understand, look at this. Recent news, Trump mocks Nikki Haley's first name is the latest example of attacking rivals based on race. Attacking rivals based on race because she's ignoring her Indian descent by going by Nikki Haley instead of Namrata. And then I get it. Some people have nicknames that they rather go by than their first name or maybe their middle name. Some people just choose whatever name. But when you are of Indian descent and then you label yourself as a white woman, you are denying essentially who you are. But let's get into it. The KKK, also known as the Ku Klux Klan, either of two distinct U.S. hate organizations that employed terror in pursuit of their white supremacist agenda. And this is from the Britannica. One group was founded immediately after the Civil War and lasted until the 1870s. The other began in 1915 and has continued to be present. Now listen to this. The KKK formed after the Civil War. Who do you think the KKK was made up of? Who you think the members of the KKK was? A lot of them were part of the Confederate Army. Exactly. They formed a religious military group when they lost the war. They said, we're still going to terrorize black people. Oh, you're going to let them free? Emancipation Proclamation, not in this country. Not in this country, Nikki Haley. The 19th century Klan was originally organized as a social club by Confederate veterans in Pulaski, Tennessee in 1866, a social club. They apparently derived the name from the Greek words klakos, from which comes the English circle. Klan was added for the sake of alliteration, and Ku Klux Klan emerged. The organization quickly became a vehicle for Southern white underground resistance to radical Reconstruction. That means allowing Negroes, aka Black Americans, to walk free from the shackles that they put them in. And let me just point this out. We have to also know that slavery, racism, discrimination didn't just occur in the South, but it was the United States. Every state, with the exception of probably Hawaii and Alaska, had slaves. Some people are like, oh no, the North didn't have no slaves. That's where the runaway slaves were. You better look at 12 Years a Slave. You better go back into your history book where they had slaves in New York. Let me move on. The Klan members sought the restoration of white supremacy through intimidation and violence aimed at the newly enfranchised black freedmen. Are you listening? Klan members sought the restoration of white supremacy, sought the restoration of white supremacy through intimidation and violence, which they killed and hung and burned a lot of our ancestors, aimed at the newly enfranchised black freedmen. A similar organization, the Knights of the White Kamala, began in Louisiana in 1867. In the summer of 1867, the Klan was constructed into the invisible empire of the South. And it goes on to tell you about the history of the KKK and how they came to be. Now, let's get back on Nikki Haley. Let's get back on Nikki Haley and the country in which her parents derived from and which her lineage started from, India. But we're talking about the colonization of India because the reason why I'm doing this, family, the reason why I'm coming back is because we understand that Nikki Haley got on national TV and lied to the American people. She lied to the American people, stating that America has never been a racist country, where her family comes from a country that was colonized simply because of the color of their skin being non-white. The British ruled India for around 89 years, from 1858 to 1947. The period is known as the British Raj, which means kingdom, realm, state, or empire in Hindi. The British first landed in India in the 1600s, but the British East India Company controlled India before the British Crown took over. The British established their dominance in India after the Battle of Plassey in 1757. What is Nikki Haley talking about? What the hell is this woman talking about? According to some, the period from 1880 to 1920 was particularly devastating for India. During this time, British colonialism is said to have killed 100 million Indians and increased extreme poverty from 23% in 1810 to more than 50% in the mid-20th century. And India is still trying to rebuild from the 90 years of colonization from the British Empire. That is what we're getting from Nikki Haley. Wise states that her not using her real name shows a desire to assimilate to white American standards. She's fully assimilated white woman for all intent and purposes. I agree 100%. Let's talk about colorism in India. Yeah, let's talk about colorism in India. Now, you guys, if you live in any of the states of the United States, especially certain states like Texas, where they have very large Indian population and pockets, you will see really light-skinned Indians, as you see on the screen here. Then you will also see dark-skinned Indians, okay? Colorism or discrimination based on skin tone is a complex issue in India. So she didn't get her color complex from America. She got it from her parents because her parents come from a country where they discriminate on people based on their skin tone, and the Indians got that from the colonization of the British. It states here it's a form of prejudice that treats people of certain ethnic groups or people who are perceived as darker skinned differently based on their skin. Because they say, you know what? Once the British people started mixing with the Indians, who were initially all dark skinned, very few of them were very light skinned. Just think how the British created the color caste system in India. And even though they gave them their independence 90 years later, how they still is holding true to the color caste system in India, as well as any country Indians go to. I hear about colorism of the Indians that go to Africa. I hear about colorism right here in these United States. Colorism in India is rooted in a history of class and caste discrimination. This history supports the idea that fair-skinned people are more intellectual, more attractive, and higher in society than darker-skinned people. It's also partly a product of colonial prejudice and has been exacerbated by caste, regional differences, and Bollywood. I don't know you guys are familiar with Bollywood. It's a spinoff of Hollywood as well as Nollywood. That's a Nigerian version of Hollywood as well. And all these countries that have been colonized by the British have some form of colorism, even Nigerians. Nigerians suffer for, I'm gonna get into the skin bleaching, the cake soap as well. A lot of these people suffer from colorism. Because India, like many colonized nations, grapple with the damaging effects of British imperialism, including the perpetuation of colorist ideologies. The British colonial rules propagated the notion that fair skin was superior, thereby creating a hierarchy based on complexion. Based on complexion. Look at this. She was accused of improper relations by two separate men. One was a lobbyist and the other was a political blogger. I jumped ahead. Give me 1 second, fam. I jumped ahead. Now, this is an interview on my main channel called Black Logic. Go check out my other channel, Black Logic. Subscribe and like to this channel as well, and subscribe to that one as well. Help a brother out. HBO, help a brother out. Now, I interviewed Shweta Agrawal. Now, I'm going to read some of this so you can get some context and some background on her. She stated here, ever since the Black Lives Matter movement following the brutal murder of George Floyd in 2020, I have found myself sharing numerous stories about my past with my 2 children and husband, having experienced color prejudice or insensitive remarks about my brown skin tone throughout my life. My past has come back to haunt me, uninvited and unwanted, a dark past, or as Indians would call it, the Kala past. Although I have mostly a wonderful, blessed life growing up between India and Japan and now living in the UK, why no one ever lives in their own country? Anyway, I digress. There are elements of my past that are painful, to say the least. Painful because I happen to be dark-skinned, born to fair parents, and this was seen by some Indians as an open invitation for taunting and derogatory comments. And this is in India. For hundreds of years, Indians have harbored the notion that being fair-skinned is a ticket to superiority. That's right, white supremacy doesn't just exist among white people. Ooh. I read this book. I have this book. It was a good book. I need to have her back on the broadcast. Sadly, this is still the case even in modern liberated India. For years, I've tried to forget my painful past, like childbirth, but the remarks even now are relentless, leaving me festering like a sore. Writing about my past in his attempt to face this color prejudice head on. They say writers should write what they know. I'm not a writer. My memoir is about who I was and who I've become, as it is a collage of extracts from my memory. Digging deep from the tender age of 6, the rendition is not as clear, cut as black and white. There are several shades of brown in between, no pun intended. Unraveling my story, I discovered more than I was prepared for, many buried secrets, and some darker than colorism. Now, what people need to understand also about this book, she talks about her fight and addiction to skin bleaching creams. She talks about her addiction to skin bleaching creams, family. That's what we're getting at here today. And I think another point out here, and I just pointed this out that she was having an affair with 2 other guys, okay? But there's some other things I want to talk about when it comes to Nikki Haley's denial of racism in America, okay? Nikki Haley's denial of racism in America. Let me help Nikki Haley out with a quick history lesson, if you guys don't mind, because there's some things that we have to point out. We already know about slavery. We don't need to beat the drum on slavery, but let's jump right to Jim Crow laws, because Jim Crow laws, perhaps the most notorious system of legal segregation, and I say again, the system of legal segregation, meaning that it was backed by state laws. Jim Crow laws were enacted in the late 19th and early 20th century, primarily in southern states. They said primarily, but there were some in northern states. These laws mandated racial segregation in public facilities. Okay, anything that was public facilities, schools, transportation, and housing, because they effectively institutionalized racial discrimination and enforced white supremacy, denying Black Americans their basic rights and dignity. What about the Black codes? Because following the abolition of slavery, southern states enacted black codes to restrict the freedom and economic opportunities of newly emancipated Black citizens. These codes imposed severe restrictions on Black labor, on Black movement, and civil rights. It effectively created a new form of legal bondage for Black Americans. You want to go to voting restrictions? Now, here's a plug. We have no voting restrictions today. So don't let the Democrats fool you guys into voting Democrat once again with the whole voter restrictions. We don't have voter restrictions today. I'm talking about back then. Because throughout American history, various laws and practices were implemented to disenfranchise Black voters. They had poll tax, they had literary tests, they had grandfather clause, and other taxes were used to suppress Black political participation and maintain white dominance in the electoral process. And the reason why I say this, the only thing that I've seen that come out the Republican Party, and Nikki Haley actually pointing some of this out, and she passed some of these things in South Carolina, was voter ID laws. That is totally different. That is totally different than literacy tests, because they knew at the time that majority of Black Americans were illiterate. There wasn't many of us coming out of slavery that were literate. We had to learn because it was illegal in slavery. It was illegal in slavery to learn how to read, to actually do math and science. Okay, and it took some time for us to get acquainted to the freedom that we had and all the restrictions that was opposed on us, even through Jim Crow. But again, we're educated, we're smart, we're intelligent now, so let's move on. Okay, cool. So the point I'm making here is there's no voter restrictions of today, but there were voter restrictions back then. Poll taxes, literary tests, some of the grandfather clause that they had in place, so on and so forth. What about redlining? Because in the 20th century, federal housing policies, including redlining, and that was a way by the Second Civil Rights Act of 1968 to wipe away redlining. Did you guys know about that? Look at the Civil Rights Act of 1964, then look at the Civil Rights Act of 1968, which kind of was the extenuation of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, but nonetheless. It was to wipe away redlining because redlining designated predominantly black neighborhoods as high risk for mortgage lenders, which greatly depreciated their homes. It effectively denied black family access to home ownership and perpetuating racial segregation and wealth disparities. What about the drug laws, the so-called war on drugs that disproportionately targeted black communities, leading to harsher penalties for drug offenses that disproportionately affected black people? This punitive approach fueled mass incarceration, Joe Biden, in the 1994 crime bill, and perpetuated racial disparities in the criminal justice system. Nope. What about for centuries? Interracial marriages was illegal in many states through anti-miscegenation laws, because these laws rooted in white supremacy and racial purity ideology. It criminalized relationships between black and white individuals, furthering entrenching racial division and stigmatizing interracial families. And you know what? I'll leave with this one. What about segregation in education? Because even after the landmark Brown versus Board of Education, the Supreme Court decision declared school segregation unconstitutional in 1954. Many states resisted integration efforts through massive resistance, sometimes violent, and freedom of choice plans, perpetuating segregated education systems and unequal opportunities for black students. So Nikki Haley, that's a quick history lesson of this racist, discriminatory country that we all live and love, okay? As black Americans, believe it or not, we absolutely love America. We just hate what America has allowed. There you have it, Nikki Haley. You are not fit to even run to be the president of these United States of America. Because when given the opportunity to come forward and say it was a slip of a tongue, to right your wrong and say, I should have said this. I should acknowledge the main reason for the Civil War. I should have never stated that America is not a racist country because I too was discriminated upon. You didn't do all of that. As Wise said, you have fully assimilated yourself for all intent and purposes as a white woman. And that is why you shouldn't waste any more of your taxpayers' dollars by giving you donations to run on a failed campaign. That doesn't mean that Donald Trump is better. That just means that because of your ignorance and your denial of why America exists today, this goes to show you, you're not even fit to be governor of the state that you come out of. This is the Black Post. The message was sent.